working as a receptionist at a luxury hotel. She froze upon recognizing that the guest among the millionaires was her brother who had disappeared a decade ago. She approached, and Anna had been working at the hotel's reception for 5 years. Her days were filled with routines, polite smiles, and formalities, one after the other, blending into a monotonous blur. Nothing ever seemed to change until she saw that name on the computer screen, Marco Silva. It was as if her heart had stopped for a moment. She felt a rush of memories and emotions she had kept buried deep inside for years. Her hands trembled slightly as she confirmed the reservation, her mind struggling to process the reality of what she had just seen. It can't be, she thought, a sharp wave of anxiety gripping her chest. Marco, her brother, had disappeared 10 years ago, without a trace, without a word. Was it possible that he was coming back now, out of the blue, as if a decade hadn't gone by? She scanned the lobby, her eyes darting toward the entrance every time the automatic door slid open. Minutes passed like hours, and then she saw him. The man approached the front desk with a slow, confident stride, carrying himself with a kind of ease that stirred something painful in Anna's gut. He looked exactly the same, or at least the same as she remembered. The same tousled brown hair, the strong jawline, and those familiar green eyes. Yet, there was a coldness in his expression, a distance as if he were a stranger passing by. She tried to speak, but her voice came out in a weak whisper. "Marco, is that you?" The question hung in the air, carrying with it all the years of uncertainty, all the sleepless nights wondering if he was dead or alive. The man stopped mid-step, his eyes meeting hers with a flicker of confusion. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone polite but guarded. "You must have me confused with someone else. My name is Daniel." Anna's breath caught in her throat. No, it was him. It had to be. She felt a surge of desperation and a flood of memories. Playing together in the backyard as children, him teaching her to ride a bike, the sound of his voice calling her little sister. It couldn't be a mistake. "No," she insisted, her voice stronger now, laced with a determination that seemed to come from some deep, primal place. "I know you. You're my brother, Marco." The man's eyes widened slightly. Then he took a step back, his body stiffening as if preparing for an unexpected confrontation. I think you really have the wrong person," he said, the words coming out slowly, almost cautiously. "I've never had a sister. I'm from Los Angeles. Daniel Thompson," he added, as if the extra details would somehow convince her that he was telling the truth. But Anna saw the hesitation in his eyes, the subtle quiver in his voice. There was a crack in his story, and she wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. "You don't remember me?" Anna's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched on the edge of the reception desk. "We grew up together in a small town just outside of New York. You went missing 10 years ago. I spent years looking for you. Do you understand what that did to me?" Daniel, Marco, she was sure of it, looked visibly uneasy now, his eyes briefly darting away as if trying to escape from a place his mind had blocked off long ago. "I'm sorry," he said again, though this time his voice was softer, tinged with a kind of regret that couldn't be faked. "I really don't know what you're talking about. I've lived in California my whole life." The exchange had caught the attention of a couple of guests nearby, who cast curious glances toward the front desk. Anna noticed, but didn't care. Her world had already narrowed down to this moment, to the man in front of her who was trying to deny everything she knew. She had waited too long, had suffered too much, to simply accept his refusal. "Look, Daniel, or whatever you call yourself," she said, leaning in slightly, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "If you're hiding something, I'm going to find out what it is. And if you are Marco, if you really are my brother, then you owe me an explanation." He took a deep breath, his gaze shifting to meet hers with a strange mixture of defiance and confusion. "I don't owe you anything," he replied, his voice steady but his hands fidgeting nervously by his sides. "I don't know you, and I don't know this Marco person. I've been living my life, and it has nothing to do with you." Anna felt the sting of his words, but she wasn't convinced. There was something off about the way he spoke, the way he seemed to struggle to keep his story consistent. It wasn't just denial. There was fear there too, fear of the truth, or perhaps of something buried even deeper. She knew she couldn't push him any further, not now. If she came on too strong, he might disappear again, and this time she might never find him. But she wasn't giving up. "Fine," she said, forcing herself to sound indifferent. "If that's the way you want it, Daniel. But I'm not done with this. I'll be around if you change your mind." As he turned and walked away, Anna watched him carefully, searching for any sign of recognition, of hesitation. And for the briefest moment, just before he exited the lobby, he glanced back at her. A fleeting look that lasted barely a second, but it was there. It was enough to tell her that she wasn't imagining things, that beneath whatever identity he was trying to cling to, there was a part of him that remembered. Anna knew this was only the beginning. There were too many unanswered questions, too many coincidences that didn't add up. She would dig deeper, find out who this Daniel really was, and if necessary, force him to confront the truth, no matter how much it hurt. For now, all she could do was watch as the man who might be her brother disappeared into the crowd, leaving her alone with a desperate sense of longing, hope, and a growing suspicion that the past was far from over. And as she prepared herself for the next steps, one thought kept echoing in her mind. If this really is Marco, then who turned him into Daniel? In the days that followed, Anna's thoughts were consumed by Daniel. She replayed every moment, every detail of their encounter, over and over in her mind, searching for clues that might confirm what her heart already knew. The way he looked at her, the hesitancy in his voice, the subtle shift in his posture when she said the name Marco, all of it fueled her belief that he was indeed her brother. She could not ignore the feeling that something was wrong, that the truth was just out of reach, veiled by whatever life Daniel had built for himself. Driven by the certainty gnawing at her, Anna reached out to Carlos, an old childhood friend who had become a private investigator. If anyone could find out the truth, it was him. "Carlos," Anna said during their first meeting in his cluttered office, "I need your help. There's this man. He looks just like Marco. He says his name is Daniel, but I swear it has to be him. He's different, but I can feel it. There's something he's not telling me." Carlos listened patiently, tapping his pen against the edge of his desk. "Anna, you know I'm willing to help you," he began, his tone cautious, "but you have to be ready for the possibility that this man is just a stranger who happens to look like your brother. I don't want to see you get hurt if it turns out that way. It's been 10 years. A lot can happen in that time." "I know," Anna replied, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed a hint of desperation. "I'm prepared for whatever the truth is. I just need to know. I need to be sure." "Okay," Carlos agreed, his expression softening. "I'll look into him. It might take some time to dig up his past, but if there's something there, I'll find it." As days passed without any updates, Anna found herself crossing paths with Daniel more frequently. It wasn't intentional, at least not at first, but she kept running into him in the hotel lobby, the bar, even in the elevator. Each encounter was like a chess match, with both of them cautious, neither revealing too much. There was an unspoken tension between them, a silent acknowledgement that whatever this was, it was far from resolved. One evening, Anna found herself in the hotel bar after a long shift. She was nursing a glass of wine when she noticed Daniel sitting a few seats away, alone. She hadn't intended to talk to him, but something in his demeanor drew her in. He looked troubled. The usual mask of polite indifference had slipped, revealing a glimpse of uncertainty beneath. She decided to approach him. "Daniel," she said, her voice casual but with a hint of curiosity. "Fancy seeing you here." He turned towards her, a slight smile on his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Anna," he greeted her. "Looks like we keep bumping into each other." She took the seat next to him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of recognition. "You seem different tonight," she observed. "Is everything okay?" Daniel hesitated before answering, as if choosing his words carefully. "I'm fine," he said, then paused. "You just seem distracted lately. Like there's something on your mind." Anna felt her pulse quicken. Was he trying to turn the conversation toward her? Or was it genuine concern? "It's just," she began, then stopped. She decided to take a risk. "When I saw you for the first time, I had this overwhelming feeling that I knew you, not just from seeing you here, but from a long time ago. It was like déjà vu. Do you ever feel like that?" He looked at her, and for a moment, she thought she saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of recognition, quickly masked. "Déjà vu," he repeated, almost as if tasting the words. "I suppose we all experience it. But sometimes, Anna, coincidences are just that, coincidences." She didn't miss the way his eyes darkened when he said it, as if he didn't quite believe his own words. "And sometimes," she countered softly, "they aren't." There was a silence between them, a heavy pause where it seemed like something important could be said, but wasn't. Daniel was the first to break it, his voice turning light again, almost dismissive. "Well, if there's something you want to know about me, just ask. I'm not that mysterious." Anna let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Somehow, I doubt that." The next day, Carlos called. "Anna, I've got some preliminary findings," he said, his tone serious. "There's something strange about Daniel's background. His records only go back 5 years. Before that, there's nothing. No school records, no employment history, not even a residential address. It's like he didn't exist." Anna's heart raced. What does that mean? Could someone have fabricated his identity? "It's possible," Carlos replied. "It wouldn't be the first time someone started over with a new life. But for now, it's just speculation. I'll keep digging." With every passing day, Anna's conviction grew. She continued to encounter Daniel around the hotel, and each time, she noticed things. A subtle familiarity in the way he moved, the way he would glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking. It was as if part of him knew her too, but was struggling against it, refusing to let the memories surface. One afternoon, as she was finishing her shift, Anna spotted Daniel leaving the gym on the lower level. His hair was damp with sweat, and there was a weariness in his movements. It seemed like a good opportunity to engage him in a more relaxed setting, without the barriers of formality. "Hey, Daniel," she called out as she approached him. "I didn't know you were into fitness." He shrugged, reaching for a towel from his gym bag. "It helps clear my head," he said. "You should try it sometime." "I might," she replied, then added more earnestly, "How long have you been into working out?" He hesitated, just for a second before answering. "A few years, I guess. It's been part of my routine for a while now." Anna seized on the hesitation. "A few years? That would be around the time your life, or rather, Daniel Thompson's life, seems to have started. Doesn't that strike you as strange?" His eyes narrowed slightly, his guard instantly going up. "What exactly are you trying to say, Anna?" She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know you're hiding something. I don't know what it is yet, but I will find out. Daniel's expression hardened. Anna, if you keep pushing this, you're going to end up disappointed. I'm just who I say I am. Then why? She asked, her tone almost a plea. Do I feel like you're lying? He didn't answer. Instead, he slung his bag over his shoulder and walked away, leaving her standing there, a mix of frustration and determination surging within her. She watched as he disappeared down the hallway, the feeling that he was slipping away from her again pressing against her chest. Anna knew she was running out of time. If Daniel truly was Marco, then she needed to uncover the truth before he vanished for good. She had to confront the man behind the mask, whether he was willing to admit who he really was or not. As she dialed Carlos again, she steeled herself for whatever came next. The investigation was only beginning, and she would not stop until the past was brought fully into the light. The truth was closer than ever, but she had a feeling that uncovering it would come at a cost. A few days later, Carlos reached out. His voice on the other end of the line carried an unmistakable urgency. Anna, there's something off about Daniel's records. I've dug deep, and there's just nothing before 5 years ago. No school records, no employment history, no medical files. It's like he appeared out of thin air. Anna felt a chill run through her. What do you mean nothing? That's impossible. Everyone has some kind of paper trail, she replied, gripping the phone tightly. It's not just unusual, Carlos continued, flipping through the documents he had gathered. It's as if someone made a conscious effort to erase his past. Every trace of who he was before is just gone. The words sank in slowly, but Anna's heart beat faster. This was the clue she had been waiting for. If Daniel really was Marco, someone had gone to great lengths to bury the truth. What could be behind all this? She wondered aloud. I'm not sure, Carlos admitted, but it looks like a deliberate cover-up. There's no way this happens naturally. Someone's hiding something. Armed with this new information, Anna knew she had to confront Daniel again, this time with a more direct approach. She found him at the bar later that night, sitting alone and nursing a drink. His usual guarded expression softened slightly when he saw her, but she could see a flicker of wariness in his eyes. She took a seat next to him and didn't waste time on pleasantries. Do you believe it's possible for someone to just erase their past? Her tone was casual, but there was an edge to her voice that made him look at her more closely. Daniel hesitated, swirling his drink in the glass. I suppose, he said slowly, some people might want to forget certain parts of their lives. Not everyone has a past worth remembering. Anna watched him closely. His answer wasn't a denial, but a deflection. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. But what happens if the past refuses to stay buried? If it comes back to haunt you, no matter how deep you try to hide it? The shift in his demeanor was immediate. His grip on the glass tightened, and he set it down abruptly, the soft clink echoing in the near-empty bar. Anna, I think we should stop this conversation now, he said, his tone firm but not entirely steady. She reached out, her hand lightly brushing his arm as he made to leave. Her eyes pleaded with him, not just for answers, but for recognition. Marco, please remember me. For a brief moment, Daniel's expression crumbled. His eyes widened, a flash of something, fear, pain, or perhaps a distant memory, crossed his face before he quickly masked it with a composed facade. You really need to stop this, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You're only going to hurt yourself, he added, pulling away and retreating toward the exit without looking back. Anna watched him leave, her breath caught in her throat. The brief crack in his composure had been enough. She had seen a part of Marco beneath the surface of Daniel. It was there, just out of reach, and whatever was keeping it buried was something or someone powerful enough to alter a person's entire life. The next morning, she called Carlos, determined to go deeper into the investigation. "Carlos, we need to figure out who could have wiped out Daniel's past. There has to be some connection between him and Marco's disappearance." Carlos sighed on the other end of the line. "I've already started checking criminal records, missing person reports, even witness protection cases. But if this really was some kind of cover-up, whoever did it knew what they were doing. I'll need more time. Dig into everything," Anna insisted. "Whatever it takes." In the meantime, Anna began her own search. She scoured the hotel's records, looking for anything that might give a clue about Daniel's movements or background. It was a long shot, but she had to start somewhere. Hours passed as she sifted through files, piecing together every bit of information she could find. It felt like she was chasing shadows, but then she came across something curious. A note in the booking history indicating that Daniel had been staying under different names in hotels across the country for years, always moving, never staying in one place for too long. Why would someone change their identity repeatedly? It only made her more certain that he was hiding from something or someone. Days later, she managed to catch Daniel again, this time in the lobby as he was about to leave. She stepped into his path, refusing to let him slip away this time. "Why have you been moving from hotel to hotel for the last 5 years?" she demanded, holding his gaze with unwavering intensity. Daniel's eyes narrowed, his face hardening at the question. "You've been checking up on me?" There was a dangerous edge to his voice, one that Anna hadn't heard before. "I needed to understand who you really are," she replied without flinching. "People don't just live like that for no reason. Who are you running from?" He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "What makes you think I'm running?" "You tell me," she shot back. "Because if you really are who you say you are, then there's no reason for all the secrecy. Unless, of course, you're hiding from something that happened before these last 5 years. Daniel's jaw tightened. For a moment he said nothing, the silence stretching between them. "You think you know everything, don't you?" he finally said, his voice low and controlled. "You don't have a clue what I've been through." "Then tell me," she pleaded, her voice softer. "Tell me what happened to you. If you're not Marco, then who are you?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away again, leaving Anna standing there, more convinced than ever that the man she had just spoken to was her brother. There was too much about his life that didn't make sense. Too many loose ends. If there was a truth to uncover, it was buried under layers of lies, and she was determined to dig through every one of them. Later that evening, she met Carlos again, sharing her findings about Daniel's pattern of frequent relocation. "I'm sure of it now," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "He's not just hiding. He's being kept hidden. There's a reason he's lived like this for the past 5 years. Carlos took in her words, a serious look in his eyes. "Then we need to find out who's pulling the strings." Anna nodded, knowing the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, she felt like she was on the verge of breaking the case wide open. If they could find out who was behind Daniel's fabricated life, they might just be able to piece together what happened to Marco. As she left Carlos's office that night, her thoughts were fixed on one goal. She would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. And if Daniel truly was Marco, then whoever had taken him away would finally be exposed. The hunt for answers was just beginning, and Anna was ready to confront whatever secrets lay hidden in the shadows. Anna knew it was time to escalate her investigation. The clues so far had only deepened the mystery, and now she needed answers that went beyond documents and records. Carlos managed to track down someone who knew Daniel, or Marco. His name was Raul. a man who had worked on a farm in Mexico. It was there, years ago, that Daniel had shown up injured and disoriented, with no memory of who he was. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together, but they were still jagged and incomplete. Anna boarded a plane and flew down to meet Raul in person. She arrived at the small town where the farm was located and found Raul waiting for her outside a local cantina. He was a stocky man in his 50s, his face weathered by the sun and a life of hard labor. There was a look of concern in his eyes when he saw Anna approaching, as if he already knew the seriousness of what she had come to discuss. "Raul?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Anna. Thank you for meeting with me." Raul shook her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "I didn't think I'd ever hear from anyone about Daniel again," he said, motioning for her to sit down at a nearby table. "But I remember him well. He was lost." Anna leaned in, her voice urgent. "Please, tell me everything you know. When did you first see him? What was he like?" Raul took a deep breath, his gaze drifting to the distant mountains as if trying to pull the memories from the past. "It was about 5 years ago. I found him wandering near the edge of the farm, covered in dirt and blood, like he had been running for a long time. He didn't know his name or where he came from. We asked him many times, but he had no answers." Anna's heart tightened at the image of her brother. If it was truly him, alone and injured in a foreign place, stripped of his identity. And then, what happened after you found him? "We took him in," Raul continued. "He stayed with us on the farm for a few months. He worked, tried to find some sense of normalcy. He was a good worker, but you could see it in his eyes. He was haunted by whatever had happened to him. He kept having these nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night, shouting words we didn't understand." Anna's voice trembled as she asked, "Did he ever remember anything? Even the smallest detail?" Raul shook his head slowly. "Nothing. At least, not until Alex Ramirez came along." At the mention of that name, Anna felt a chill spread through her. "Who is Alex Ramirez?" Raul's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing slightly as he spoke. "Alex came to the farm saying he was looking for someone, a family member who had gone missing. He had this way about him, like he could charm anyone, make you believe whatever he said. He took a special interest in Daniel, claimed he could help him recover his memories, even offered to take him to specialists in the city. And Daniel went with him?" Anna asked, though she already knew the answer. Raul nodded grimly. "We tried to warn him. Some of us didn't trust Alex. There was something off about the man, too polished, too persuasive. But Daniel was desperate for answers. He thought Alex could help him find out who he really was. So he left with him. After that, we never saw him again." Anna's mind raced, trying to piece together what Raul had told her. It made sense. Daniel's sudden appearances and disappearances, the blank records, the constant movement. If Alex was behind it, then it wasn't just about amnesia. There was a reason someone would want to keep Marco's identity buried. What kind of man was Alex really? Anna pressed. "Did you ever find out more about him?" Raul hesitated, then leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "There were rumors about Alex. Some said he was involved in things, illegal things, human trafficking, money laundering. You could never be sure, because he always covered his tracks, but the stories were there. We thought maybe he was using Daniel for something, but we couldn't prove it." Anna felt a surge of anger and helplessness wash over her. If Alex had used her brother, taken advantage of his vulnerability, then she would make sure he answered for it. But for now, she needed more information, something concrete that could lead her to this mysterious man. "Raul, please," she pleaded. "Is there anything else you remember?" Anything that could help me find Alex. Raul's brow furrowed in concentration, as if he were searching his memory for any detail that might have slipped through the cracks. There was one thing, he said slowly. Before they left, I overheard Alex talking on the phone. He mentioned a place, Las Cruces. I don't know if it means anything, but it was the only clue we had. Las Cruces, Anna repeated, her mind already racing ahead to the possibilities. She would follow this lead wherever it took her. Thank you, Raul. You've helped me more than you know. As she left the cantina, Anna's determination burned brighter than ever. She had a name, a possible location, and a deeper understanding of the forces that had taken her brother away. She would pursue Alex Ramirez to the ends of the earth if she had to. The man's charm and persuasion would not save him this time. Her next step was to inform Carlos and see what they could uncover about Alex and his connection to Las Cruces. There was no time to waste. If Alex had used Marco for some illicit purpose, then there were more layers to this mystery than she had imagined, and it was time to peel them back, one by one. The journey for answers was becoming darker and more dangerous, but Anna was prepared to face it. She wasn't just searching for Marco anymore. She was on a mission to bring him back from the depths of a hidden past. Whatever Alex had done to him, it was time for the truth to finally come to light. Anna shared everything she had uncovered with Carlos, and together they began tracking Alex Ramirez's movements. It didn't take long for Carlos to dig up troubling connections. Alex was no ordinary man. He had a history that pointed to involvement in serious criminal activities, including fraud, identity trafficking, and even links to underground networks known for exploiting vulnerable people. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that Alex had orchestrated an elaborate scheme, one that likely involved Marco or Daniel, as he had come to be known. As Anna and Carlos delved deeper into Alex's web of deceit, Marco began to experience sporadic flashbacks, brief, vivid glimpses of a life that seemed both familiar and alien. They started as small fragments. The sound of a child's laughter, the sight of a young woman's smiling face. He couldn't place the details, but he sensed they were important, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that didn't quite fit together yet. Whenever the memories surfaced, there was a distinct feeling of warmth and safety, emotions that contrasted sharply with the empty shell he had been living in. The more the memories intruded, the more he questioned the identity Alex had imposed on him. One evening, as he sat in his hotel room, the memories hit him with unusual clarity. It was a memory of running in a backyard, a young girl chasing him, her laughter echoing through the air. He stumbled and fell, scraping his knee, and then she was there, helping him up with a worried look in her eyes. "Are you okay, Marco?" she had asked. The sound of his name triggered something deep inside, a buried truth struggling to emerge. He whispered it aloud to himself, testing the feel of it on his tongue. Marco? The realization struck with the force of a lightning bolt. He had a sister, and her name was Anna. Meanwhile, Anna and Carlos managed to trace Alex's location to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a decrepit structure, isolated and seemingly deserted, the kind of place where secrets went to die. Carlos had already called in a favor from a contact in law enforcement, securing backup if things went sideways. But Anna's focus was singular: confront Alex and get the answers she had been desperately seeking. They approached the warehouse cautiously, Carlos's hand resting on the gun holstered at his side. He glanced at Anna, his expression one of concern mixed with determination. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready for 10 years, Anna replied, her voice cold and steady. "Let's go." Inside, the air was heavy with silence, punctuated only by the echo of their footsteps. As they ventured further into the dimly lit space, They saw a figure standing near a cluster of crates. It was Alex, casually leaning against a stack, as if he had been expecting them. His posture was relaxed, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes, a hint of amusement playing on his lips. "Well, well," Alex said, his voice smooth and mocking. "It looks like the prodigal sister has finally caught up to me. I wondered how long it would take you. Where is he?" Anna demanded, stepping forward. "What did you do to my brother?" Alex chuckled, pushing himself off the crates and walking slowly towards her. "Your brother?" he repeated, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Oh, you mean Daniel. Or is it Marco now? He's had so many names. It's hard to keep track." Anna clenched her fists, fury boiling inside her. "You used him. You took advantage of him when he had nothing. No memory, no identity." "Why? Why?" Alex said, raising an eyebrow. "Because he was useful, of course. Do you think I go around helping lost souls out of the goodness of my heart? He had a certain potential that I found valuable." "Potential?" Carlos interjected, his voice sharp. "You mean you exploited him? For what? Your identity trafficking schemes?" Alex's smile faded and his eyes hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snapped. "This was about much more than some petty identity scam. Marco had connections, family ties that I needed to leverage for certain financial opportunities. It wasn't personal, just business." Anna felt a pang of horror as the implications of Alex's words sank in. "You knew who he was all along," she whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You kept him away from us on purpose." "Of course I did," Alex replied coolly. "The last thing I needed was for him to start remembering his old life. That would have complicated things. But I underestimated him, and you—" He gestured towards Anna. "You were more persistent than I anticipated. But it's not too late, you know. We could still reach an understanding. There's a lot of money to be made if you're willing to look the other way." "Go to hell," Anna spat. "I'm not interested in your deals. I want my brother back." Alex's expression turned cold, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Then you're going to be very disappointed, Anna, because the man you're looking for doesn't exist anymore. Marco is gone. Daniel is all that's left, and I've made sure of that." Before Anna could respond, there was a sudden movement in the shadows behind Alex. To her shock, Marco stepped into the light. His eyes met hers with a mixture of recognition and confusion, as if he were struggling to reconcile the person he had been with the identity forced upon him. "Marco," Anna said, her voice breaking. "It's me, Anna, your sister." For a moment, Marco hesitated. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, familiarity, longing. But then Alex's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "Don't listen to her, Daniel," he said. "She's just trying to confuse you. Remember who you are." But Marco didn't move. He stared at Anna, the memories pushing to the surface, breaking through the barriers Alex had built in his mind. "Anna," he said slowly, the name rolling off his tongue like a forgotten song. I remember you." Alex's face twisted into a scowl. "Enough of this," he growled, reaching for a weapon concealed inside his jacket. But before he could pull it out, Carlos had already drawn his gun, aiming it directly at Alex. "Don't even think about it," Carlos warned, his voice steady. "It's over, Ramirez." Alex hesitated, his hand hovering near his weapon as he weighed his options. Finally, with a sneer, he raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Fine," he said, his tone laced with contempt. "You've won. For now." As the police arrived to take Alex into custody, Anna rushed to Marco's side. She reached out to touch his arm, as if to confirm he was real, that he was truly standing there before her. "Marco, are you okay?" she asked, her eyes searching as for any sign of the brother she had known. I think so," Marco replied, his voice shaky. "But I don't know who I am anymore. It's like there are two different lives in my head." Anna took his hand, squeezing it gently. "It doesn't matter, Marco," she said softly. "We'll figure it out together. You're not alone anymore." As Alex was led away in handcuffs, Anna knew that their fight wasn't over. The damage he had done would take time to heal, and there were still many unanswered questions. But for now, she had her brother back, and that was all that mattered. The path to reclaiming Marco's identity would be a difficult one, but Anna was determined to walk it with him, step by step, no matter what lay ahead. The warehouse buzzed with tension. Alex stood confidently, surrounded by a group of armed men, their weapons discreetly visible but ready. Anna and Carlos had pushed forward despite the danger, their focus fixed on the man who had torn their lives apart. Anna's eyes burned with determination as she faced Alex. "Let him remember who he really is," she demanded, her voice steady but laced with fury. "You can't keep him prisoner in this lie forever." Alex's lips curled into a mocking smile, a cold amusement dancing in his eyes. "Prisoner? You've got it all wrong, Anna," he said, taking a step forward. "Marco is far better off with me than he ever was with you. He has a new life, a new identity. Why are you so desperate to drag him back into the past?" Before Anna could respond, Marco emerged from behind the row of crates, stepping into the space between them. His movements were tentative, but there was a clarity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked at Anna, then back at Alex, a struggle evident in his expression as pieces of his past began to fall into place. "I remember," Marco said, his voice rough, like he was forcing the words out from somewhere deep within. "I remember you," he continued, his gaze shifting toward Anna. His eyes softened, the familiarity sparking recognition. "And her," he said, pointing directly at Anna. "She is my sister." The tension in the room snapped taut as the revelation hung in the air. For a split second, there was silence. Then, Alex's voice cut through, low and urgent, trying to claw back control. "Don't listen to her, Daniel," he barked, his tone sharpening. "She's filling your head with lies. You know who you are. You've always been Daniel Thompson, a man with no past and no need for one." But Marco didn't move. The weight of his memories, fragments of the person he once was, flooded back despite Alex's desperate attempts to suppress them. He could see it clearly now, his childhood, Anna's face, their shared laughter, and the day he disappeared. All the missing years, all the lies, now unraveling in his mind like a tightly wound coil springing loose. "No," Marco said, his voice growing stronger. "That's not true." He turned to Alex, his face hardening with defiance. "You never gave me anything but chains. You used me when I didn't know who I was. You took advantage of me because I was broken." His words were filled with anger, the kind that had simmered for too long and was now ready to explode. "I won't live this lie any longer." Alex's calm facade cracked, his eyes narrowing as he shot a glance at his men. "You're making a mistake, Marco," he warned, his voice laced with a barely concealed threat. "After everything I've done for you, you're just going to walk away? You don't know what you're throwing away." Anna took a step closer to Marco, her eyes never leaving Alex's. "He's not throwing anything away," she said, her voice like steel. "He's reclaiming what's his life, his identity, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." With a sharp gesture, Alex signaled to his men, who immediately raised their weapons. "I try to be reasonable," Alex said, his tone cold and final. But it looks like you've made your choice. If you won't be Daniel, then you're no use to me at all." In that split second, chaos erupted. Carlos sprang into action, drawing his gun and firing a warning shot that echoed through the cavernous space. "Everyone, drop your weapons," he shouted, his voice booming with authority. "It's over, Ramirez." The armed men hesitated, glancing toward Alex for direction. But before Alex could respond, Marco surged forward, his eyes blazing with a fury born from years of lost time and stolen identity. He swung at Alex, catching him off guard and knocking him to the ground. The two struggled on the concrete floor, grappling for control as Alex tried to reach for the weapon tucked in his belt. Anna's heart pounded as she watched her brother fight for his freedom, the years of confusion and manipulation culminating in this desperate struggle. She rushed forward, her instincts driving her to protect him. She grabbed a metal pipeline nearby and swung it down hard, striking the ground beside Alex's hand just as he was about to pull the gun free. "Stay down," Anna commanded, her voice raw with emotion. Carlos moved in quickly, pinning Alex's arms behind his back. "You're done, Ramirez," he growled, pulling out a pair of handcuffs and snapping them around Alex's wrists. "You're going to answer for everything." Alex glared up at Marco, his eyes dark with hatred. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "You're still lost. You'll never be whole again." Marco stood over him, breathing heavily, his fists clenched. He stared down at Alex, not with the look of a man who would want to fight, but with the gaze of someone who had finally found a piece of himself that had been missing for far too long. "I don't need you to be whole," Marco said quietly. "I have my sister. I have my family. That's enough." As the police finally arrived, storming the warehouse and securing the scene, Marco turned to Anna. The look in his eyes was different now, no longer clouded by uncertainty. He reached out and took her hand, gripping it tightly. "I remember, Anna," he said, his voice filled with both relief and sadness. "I remember everything." Anna felt a tear slip down her cheek as she pulled him into a tight embrace, her arms wrapping around him as though she could shield him from all the pain he had endured. "We'll fix this," she whispered. "We'll put the pieces back together." Alex was dragged away in cuffs, still sneering, still trying to cling to the power he no longer had. But the truth had finally come to light, and there was nothing left for him to manipulate. The battle for Marco's freedom had been won, but Anna knew the war for his healing was just beginning. There would be scars, some visible and others hidden, that they would have to face together. But as they left the warehouse, Anna felt a sense of hope, a belief that they could rebuild, that the bond between them was stronger than any lie Alex had tried to create. Now, it was time to begin the process of healing, one memory at a time. Together, they would find their way back. With Alex behind bars, Marco faced a difficult journey of reclaiming his identity. It wasn't as simple as remembering who he was. It was about untangling the life Alex had forced on him and the real life that had been left behind. Therapy sessions filled Marco's days, each one bringing up painful memories, fractured images of a past that seemed to belong to someone else. At times, the memories collided with the false life he had lived as Daniel, making it hard to distinguish what was real and what had been fabricated. Anna was by his side through it all, a constant presence who reminded him of the person he had once been. She accompanied him to the therapy sessions, sitting in the waiting room for hours, just so that he would know she was there. Marco found comfort in her unwavering support, but there were days when even her presence wasn't enough to keep the darkness at bay. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session, Marco found himself pacing the small apartment Anna had rented for him. He felt restless, like his skin didn't quite fit, as if there was a piece of himself that had been carved out and was still missing. Anna walked in, carrying a cup of coffee she had just brewed, and noticed the look on his face. "You look like you're 1,000 miles away," she said softly, setting the cup down on the table. He stopped pacing, turning to face her. "Sometimes it feels like I am," Marco admitted, his voice heavy with frustration. "There are days when I remember everything. Our childhood, the accident, even the day I disappeared. And then there are days when it all feels distant, like I'm not the person who lived those memories. Like I'm someone else, a stranger." Anna nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, feeling the familiar roughness of his skin. "Marco, you went through something unimaginable," she said gently. "Alex tried to take away who you were, but he didn't succeed. You're still here. You're still my brother." He sighed, pulling his hand away to run it through his hair. "I just don't know who I am anymore," he said, his tone edged with despair. "It's like I'm caught between two worlds. One where I was Marco, your brother, and another where I was Daniel. This person with a life that wasn't really mine but still feels real." The truth of his struggle was raw and jagged. The years as Daniel couldn't simply be erased. They had shaped him, for better or worse. There were moments when the memories as Daniel seemed to mesh with those of Marco, creating a blurred line that left him unsure where one identity ended and the other began. "Do you remember when we used to go to the park?" Anna asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "You were always better than me at climbing trees. I'd be too scared to go high, but you'd be right at the top, looking down and laughing." Marco's face softened as a faint smile touched his lips. "Yeah, I remember," he said quietly. "You used to beg me to come down, because you were afraid I'd fall." "Of course, I was," Anna replied with a small laugh. "But you never did. You'd always climb back down, even if I had to promise you ice cream to get you to do it." There was a long pause as Marco processed the memory. "I guess I was always chasing something," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Back then it was just the highest branch. Now it's myself." Anna took a step closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to find all the pieces at once," she said. "You don't need to be perfect, Marco. Just be you, whoever that is now. It's enough." He looked at her, his eyes searching for the reassurance he had once found so easily in her presence. "And if I'm not the same brother you remember," he asked, the question hanging heavily in the air. "Then I'll get to know the new one," Anna said, squeezing his shoulder. "And we'll build new memories, just like the old ones." The journey wasn't linear. Marco had good days when his past felt vivid and close, and bad days when the fog would roll in, clouding his thoughts and making him question everything. There were times when he felt paralyzed by the guilt of the years lost, not just for himself, but for Anna and the rest of their family, who had suffered without knowing if he was alive or dead. In those moments, the only thing that seemed to ground him was Anna's voice, her calm insistence that it was okay to be broken. Therapy uncovered layers he hadn't known were there. The therapist encouraged him to talk about his time as Daniel, to acknowledge that even though it had been a life built on lies, it was still his experience. It was a complex reality to accept, how he had grown, learned, and survived under a false identity. But with each session, he peeled back another layer, and the pieces of Marco began to feel less like shards of glass and more like parts of a whole. On a rainy evening, after another exhausting day of therapy, Marco sat on the couch with Anna. She had brought out an old photo album from their childhood, filled with pictures of birthdays, family trips, and holidays. She opened it to a picture of them as children, arms wrapped around each other, their faces glowing with carefree smiles. "See," she said, pointing at the picture. "This is where it all started. This is where we can begin again." Marco stared at the photo, his eyes lingering on his younger self, a boy who had no idea how much the world would change. "I hope I can be that person again," he said, his voice laced with uncertainty. Anna shook her head. "Don't try to be him. Be who you are now. The real you is a combination of everything, Marco, Daniel, all of it. And that's okay." He took a deep breath, feeling a small but significant shift within himself. It wasn't the end of his struggle, but it was a start, a step towards healing, towards redefining who he was on his own terms. As they closed the album and set it aside, Marco felt a sense of quiet resolve. He might never completely separate the two identities that had shaped him, but he didn't have to. For the first time, he felt like he could accept the uncertainty and live with the parts of himself that didn't fit neatly into any single definition. The road to recovery stretched ahead of him, filled with unknowns, but for now, he was no longer alone. Anna had walked beside him through the darkness, and together, they would continue forward one step at a time. Months had passed since Marco's past had finally been uncovered. The truth had emerged from the shadows, bringing a measure of closure, but not without leaving scars. The journey of rediscovery had been long and painful, and though Marco had reclaimed his identity, there were still wounds that had yet to heal. He carried the weight of his experiences, the years stolen from him, the manipulation and the identity he had once been forced to accept. But there was also a renewed strength, a determination to not let the darkness define him. Anna had settled back into her job at the hotel, but her outlook had shifted. Each guest who walked through the doors now seemed to carry a story, a struggle that she saw more clearly than before. She had come to understand that life was fragile, and that the line between safety and chaos was thinner than anyone liked to believe. Her experience with Marco had opened her eyes to the quiet battles people faced, and she found herself listening more closely, offering more than the polite formalities of her role. As Marco continued his recovery, he found that confronting his past was not enough. He needed to do something with it. He couldn't simply let go of the years as Daniel, nor could he forget the helplessness of being used by someone like Alex Ramirez. He needed to transform his pain into purpose. It was during one of his therapy sessions that the idea first came to him. He spoke with his therapist about feeling lost, about needing to contribute to something larger than himself. "I keep thinking," he said one afternoon, "about all the others out there, the ones like me, people whose lives have been taken over, who have been manipulated and used. I don't want to just move on and forget about them." The therapist nodded, her expression encouraging. "Helping others can be a powerful way to heal, Marco," she replied. "If you feel drawn to this, it could be exactly what you need." That conversation planted the seed. Marco began to research organizations that dealt with trafficking, identity fraud, and support for victims of exploitation. He found a group that specialized in assisting individuals who had been trapped in situations like his, working to reunite them with their families and rebuild their lives. He reached out, initially just to learn more, but the more he spoke with the people involved, the more he felt the need to do something hands-on. He offered to volunteer and quickly found himself immersed in the work, his own experiences giving him a unique insight into the suffering of others. The organization's director, a woman named Sarah, took note of his dedication and his personal story. "We could use someone like you on our outreach team," she said one day. "Someone who's been through it, who understands what it's like to have your life turned upside down." Marco hesitated. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for that," he admitted. "I'm still dealing with my own mess." Sarah's gaze was steady. "That's exactly why you're perfect for it. You know better than anyone what these people are going through. You don't have to have it all figured out, Marco. You just have to show up. And so he did. The work was hard and often emotionally exhausting. But for the first time since his return, Marco felt that his life was moving forward instead of circling back to the same old pain. He spoke to victims who had escaped similar situations, helped reconnect families, and even worked closely with law enforcement to dismantle operations that preyed on the vulnerable. Each person he assisted was a reminder that his story could have had a different ending, and that for some, it still could. The night before Marco was set to leave for his first mission abroad with the organization, he and Anna met at the hotel where she worked. She had insisted on meeting him there, saying it was where everything had changed and it felt right for them to say goodbye in the place where their paths had reconnected. They sat together in the lobby, the familiar hum of guests checking in and out providing a backdrop to their conversation. "I can't believe you're leaving," Anna said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm so proud of you, Marco. You're doing something amazing." Marco reached across the small table and took her hand. "It's because of you," he said quietly. "If you hadn't been so determined to find me, I don't know where I'd be. I owe you my life." "No, you don't," Anna insisted, squeezing his hand. "You fought for yourself. I may have helped, but you're the one who faced it. You're the one who chose to remember and to come back." Marco's eyes shone with gratitude. "You gave me a reason to come back," he said. "You kept believing, even when I couldn't. I think that's what kept me alive, even when I didn't know who I was." There was a silence between them, one filled with the weight of everything they had endured. Finally, Anna rose from her seat and walked over to him, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. He could feel the love and the sorrow mixed in her touch, and for a moment they simply stood there, letting the years of pain and healing settle between them. "You found your way," she whispered, pulling back slightly to look into his eyes. "And I finally have my brother back." Marco gave her a soft, sincere smile, the kind that reaches eyes, a look of someone who had come through the darkness and found himself on the other side. "Yes, Anna," he said, "I'm finally free to be who I really am." As he walked out of the hotel that night, Marco felt the weight of the past begin to lift, not entirely gone, but no longer dragging him down. He was heading into the unknown once more, but this time it was by choice. He wasn't running from his past. He was facing forward, ready to embrace the new life that lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem like a void of uncertainty. It felt like an open road, one that he would navigate not as Marco or Daniel, but simply as himself. And that, he realized, was enough. If you've made it this far, then subscribe to the channel and leave a comment.